your dining and dancing pleasure. Come with me into the Wayback Machine to 2018. I give you the culprit of the terrible deal with Canada.
This morning, President Trump signed a new trade deal to replace NAFTA with the leaders of Mexico and Canada.
The best trade deal they say ever made.
No! A deal done by Trump's greatest nemesis, Trump. Not Canada, not Mexico, but the Democratic minority Senate leader. Release the Schumer!
It's going to affect beer, okay? Most of it, Corona here, comes from Mexico.
Makes me want to bomb Canada. Kidding, of course, by the way. We have a couple of Canadians here from Montreal, and I don't want to upset them because I'm going to need an apartment soon. Now, before we get rattled by Trump's 2 to 2.5 front trade war, please understand, Mexico has already today received a 30-day stay on tariffs by promising 10,000 troops to the border, and we've promised to stop the inflow of guns. What's that, Mexico? No, there's only 51 states. There's no 52nd. I'm sorry. Hold on one second. Washington, D.C.? Yeah, go yourself. All right. What's that, Puerto Rico? No, it's Canada. I think you know why. Canada. All right. Of course, by the way, since we even were writing this show at like 4 p.m., Trump has already said now he's going to pause the tariff war with Canada as well because... Let's let MTV's Road Rules star and Fox and Friends B-teamer explain DEI.
You can't focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion when you try to hire air traffic controllers. You want the best. You want the brightest protecting yourself and your family.
We will have the best and brightest in every position possible. It is colorblind and merit-based.
But these guys would have you believe that the main problem is that standards were somehow lowered to make sure that a black person or a gay person gets a chance to land your plane.
So we're putting these charges on ice for now, so Eric Adams can run his re-election campaign without technically being under indictment, and then we'll see how we feel. And maybe we'll bring the charges back based on consideration of all the relevant factors.
The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. To be clear, as part of any security guarantee, there will not be U.S. troops deployed to Ukraine.
Maybe Russia will give up a lot, maybe they won't, and it's all dependent on what is going to happen. The negotiation really hasn't started. A country in Russia's position could allow them, just in their position, could allow them to join NATO. I don't see that happening. And long before President Putin, Russia was very strong on the fact that I believe that's the reason the war started, because Biden went out and said that they could join NATO.
DEI. Sucking ego inflation.
Jon Stewart begins the show by addressing Donald Trump's return to power and, more importantly, the curious nature of his first presidential priorities. With the entire country facing pressing issues, skyrocketing inflation, a broken healthcare system, stagnant wages, and an infrastructure crisis, one might assume that a newly reinstated president would focus on policies that directly improve the lives of everyday Americans. But not Trump. No, his first orders of business are aimed squarely at three surprising targets: trans people, Canada, and diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) programs. Stewart immediately questions the logic behind these choices, wondering aloud how any of this contributes to making America great again. With his signature sarcasm, he asks whether trans people are secretly responsible for economic instability, if Canada has been quietly plotting an invasion using overly polite soldiers armed with hockey sticks, or if DEI initiatives are to blame for the rising cost of eggs and housing. Before we continue, a quick favor. If you're enjoying this, hit like and subscribe. Over 98% of viewers watch without subscribing, and it means the world to us. It's free, takes a second, and helps a ton. Done? Awesome. Back to the video. Stewart breaks down each of these priorities one by one. First, he tackles Trump's obsession with restricting trans rights. He points out that for all the GOP's claims about protecting children and preserving traditional values, their policies seem more focused on policing gender identity than addressing any real crisis. He highlights the hypocrisy in conservative rhetoric, how a party that claims to champion personal freedom and limited government somehow always finds a way to push for more government interference when it comes to people's private lives. With a quick clip montage of right-wing politicians declaring their devotion to freedom, Stewart juxtaposes these statements with footage of Republican-led states passing laws to ban gender-affirming care, restrict pronoun use, and punish parents who support their trans children. He shakes his head in disbelief, asking whether this relentless culture war is really what Americans were hoping for when they voted for change. Next, Stewart shifts to Trump's sudden hostility toward Canada. While the U.S. has long had minor diplomatic disagreements with its neighbor to the north, Trump's rhetoric goes beyond policy disputes. It's personal. He plays a clip of Trump angrily ranting about Canada, calling them terrible, and accusing them of taking advantage of the United States. Stewart bursts into laughter, joking that if there was ever a country least likely to be a global supervillain, it would be Canada. "Oh no, folks, the Canadians are coming. What are they going to do, apologize us to death?" he quips. He then imagines a satirical scenario where Canada invades the U.S., but instead of weapons, they wield Tim Hortons coffee and universal healthcare pamphlets. The discussion then moves to Trump's war on DEI initiatives. Stewart explains that these programs were designed to address systemic inequalities in hiring, education, and workplace opportunities. Yet, according to Trump and his allies, DEI has somehow become the biggest threat to American prosperity. He plays clips of conservatives railing against diversity efforts, claiming they lead to reverse discrimination against white people. Stewart shakes his head, mocking the idea that straight white men are now an oppressed class. To further explore this bizarre narrative, he turns to the Best Efkin news team for a debate on where exactly they rank in America's so-called DEI hierarchy. The correspondents jump in with their usual mix of satire and exaggerated analysis. One correspondent laments that straight white men have been pushed to the bottom of the social order, right alongside cisgender women who say, "I'm not a feminist, but..." Another correspondent claims to have done extensive research, concluding that if you are a black trans woman in a wheelchair with an emotional support dog, congratulations, you now own the Pentagon. The absurdity of the conversation reflects the absurdity of Trump's claims, highlighting how conservatives have weaponized DEI as a political boogeyman rather than engaging with the actual issues of inequality it seeks to address. Stewart jokes that, under this logic, the real punishment for white men these days isn't discrimination, it's being forced to start a podcast. With the debate reaching peak ridiculousness, Stewart brings the conversation back to reality. He reminds the audience that while Trump wages these cultural battles, everyday Americans are struggling to afford rent, healthcare, and basic necessities. He points out that while the former president claims to be fighting for the forgotten American, his policies focus more on scoring political points than delivering tangible improvements. If making America great again truly mattered, Stewart argues, the administration might focus on tax reform that benefits the working class instead of billionaires, ensuring that infrastructure projects are completed or addressing the fact that millions of Americans are drowning in medical debt. But instead, the top priorities are banning trans rights, feuding with Canada, and eliminating diversity programs. As the show nears its end, Stewart takes one final jab at Trump's inexplicable hostility toward Canada. With a mischievous grin, he warns that if Trump keeps pushing our northern neighbors, they might retaliate in the most devastating way possible, not with military force, but by sending America an even stronger wave of Justin Bieber. The screen cuts to a dystopian montage of Bieber songs, taking over every radio station, blasting through American cities as helpless citizens cover their ears. So helpless, says Trump. Stewart dramatically leans back in his chair and sighs, delivering his final punchline. Yeah, maybe we should build a wall. With that, the show signs off, leaving the audience with the unmistakable message that while Trump's priorities may generate headlines and spark outrage, they do little to address the real problems facing Americans. Instead, they serve as distractions, carefully crafted to keep the public focused on cultural grievances while the true issues remain unsolved.